There are very few artists in this world that are synonymous with a particular genre. And when it comes to the genre of the blues, anyone would be remiss to not mention the name Muddy Waters. Born McKinley Morganfield, he grew up as a sharecropper where he found his voice at a relatively young age. I want to say in his teenage years. And he was recorded by Alan Lomax, who basically recorded what they called folk music for the Library of Congress. Muddy heard himself on that record played back to him, and he realized, I have something here. And this is when he went on that journey to basically get out of the life of being a sharecropper and made his way up to Chicago. And this is when he links up with the Chess Brothers, basically becomes a staple in the Chicago blues genre that is basically an electrified version of the Mississippi Delta blues. Now, the significance of today's video, and even just talking about Muddy, it's near and dear to my heart because I like covering musicians and historical figures that have allowed themselves to protect their creative energy and have found ways to basically make that thrive and survive no matter what their circumstances are in life. And any of the bluesmen that I'm going to be covering on this channel are an embodiment of that. But Muddy Waters is the man. I mean, when you hear the man's voice, he sounds like a lion, and you're going to hear why. I mean, the guy is personified perseverance. He's somebody that basically made it through very, very difficult circumstances and was able to find success at a time in America where that was not promised to many people, let alone African Americans. So without further ado, let's get into Rollin Stone. This is Muddy Waters live at the Newport Folk Festival.
Swimming in the deep blue sea, I have all you good-looking women fishing after me, fishing after me, fishing after me. Oh, Lord.
Right off the bat, I mean, that tone, I think the brilliance of this time, and whenever I watch old recordings or listen to music that was recorded during this time, it's the fact that you know these people were good, such as Muddy, where you can hear the timbre and the depth of their voice, even through some of these not so ideal recording situations or setups. I mean, for him to be on a stage, out in like a festival field and, hearing probably whatever the backdrop noise is, and his voice just being able to have its full resonance and its tone, and you could hear it, the pitch is like perfect. But there's so much character to the voice. There's a lot of, it almost touches your nervous system at a very deep level, like the low end aspect of his voice and almost that growl. Like if I close my eyes, I always say this, I hear a lion singing, and I would always imagine if they made Muddy Waters' voice, a character, or like, his singing voice, backing up a character in a Disney movie or something, it would be this big majestic lion. And I feel like you can hear it right off the bat. And even just the lyrics. I mean, this is actually his own interpretation of a blues standard from the Delta called Catfish Blues. Pretty much the same lyrics, but it's all about dissatisfaction and this longing of, becoming one day, being able to say, hey, imagine if I had all the pretty women looking at me. Imagine if I was at this place. And it's that hope, it's that kind of, even during a time where a lot of people's experiences in the African-American community was not dignified, these men, such as Muddy Waters, were able to bring that dignity by way of the way they delivered the lyrics, but also even the fact that when they did have a personal interpretation of a song, you could hear that come through, and you could hear that bravado and that pride and that ambition come through. And this is where they could shine without it being trampled. So I just think right off the bat, you could hear the stylistic brilliance of Muddy and his band right up front.
Showing off I would. Oh, Lord. I went to my baby's house, and I sat on her step. She said, come on in now, Muddy, you know my husband just not left. My husband just not left.
I mean, that is a classic blues kind of thematic classic blues theme, I guess, even in storytelling. I think the whole backdoor man thing. Many of you, if you're entering the blues, maybe you're starting off in classic rock and you're hearing some of these phrases come out in, a lot of rock bands. I know one famous version of the song "Backdoor Man" is by The Doors, and that's a Howlin' Wolf song. But it's the whole idea of being the backdoor man. You're the side guy. You're the guy that sleeps with the good-looking girl in town who probably has like a husband that's like, a decade older, who can't really, do his thing anymore. He lost his mojo. But it's that danger too, because this is back in, when the U.S. was even more, cavalier, so to speak. So, you had a very real risk of losing your life over getting caught by the husband, and obviously you're on his property too. So, Second Amendment and all that. But there's a lot of mystique and that kind of like imagery of being a, like this kind of sultry bluesman that has this allure and this kind of sexy charisma, kind of playing the clubs and then sneaking into this, his wife's, or sneaking into someone's wife's, house and doing his thing with her and then leaving by morning before the husband gets back. It kind of has this, it's drama, it's secrecy, drama, then it's this longing for, I need to get satisfied, and it's pleasure, and it's all of that mixed together. I mean, that was Muddy's music in a nutshell. It was all these things plus danger and sex, and obviously all the themes that came with living in the big city as well. So, hearing each of these stanzas, you could tell it's him just kind of reinforcing what energy kind of came behind some of these feelings of longing.
Well, my mother, she told my father just before I was born, you got a boy child coming, he's gonna be a Rolling Stone.
Once again, it's a very classic stanza, but that whole, my mother told my father just before I was born, you got a boy child coming, he's going to be a Rolling Stone. And even that thing of like destiny-based storytelling, like, hey, I was meant for greatness, I'm going to be this guy one day. Even, the gypsy woman told my mother before I was born, you got a boy child coming, going to be a son of a gun. It was a self-worth thing. Like, these men knew that, hey, I have something. I am a man. I am a great man. And despite the circumstances of the day, that wasn't going to stop the energy and the spirit that came through. And I think that's kind of where this confidence comes from. There's a reason rock and roll, obviously, got its attitude from the blues. Anytime you add the blues to any type of music, it immediately adds that edge. It's immediately American and immediately gives that brand of rebelliousness and edge, and I'm going to go through the road less traveled and maybe, cut myself on some of these thorns or some of this glass as I get to where I need to be. And, it's interesting because back then they weren't glorifying the struggle. They were living the struggle. And I think what a lot of people do to try to emulate this is they try searching for struggle, and then they try to, put that into their art, into their creativity. But Muddy, famously would say, is like, you don't, just because you play the blues, you don't want to be living the blues constantly. And I think there's a lesson here, which I'm going to leave you all with at the end of the video. But he figured this out, where he's like, you need peace to basically create and to be able to preserve what you're doing. And, there's many gems like this that I think he had, and he was able to kind of maintain throughout his career. Very, different phases throughout his career, whether that was him working as a sharecropper and singing, and then, figuring out his way to get up to Chicago and do what he was doing, working for Chess, working in the factories. He had a sense of, I know what I'm doing next, even if there wasn't a roadmap or there wasn't somebody that did this before him in the same capacity. So that bravado is completely merited, and that comes out in the voice. You can't emulate this voice because you haven't lived that life. And this is pure mojo. It's like certain people, like James Brown, Muddy Waters, B.B. King, Hendrix, That's mojo. That's just pure. Like, you can't teach that. That's lived experience. That's a lived energy that's pouring through their music. And I think a lot of people, lose their authenticity because they're trying to emulate so much. They don't understand their own edge and what value that brings to this world. We all have an edge. Everybody feels the blues differently. And if you can translate that in your own way, it will resonate, But this is one of one. Muddy Waters.
Be a rolling stone. He gonna be a rolling stone. Oh Lord, sure enough he gone. Oh yeah. Well, I feel, yes I feel. While I light the Lord on, time ain't long.
That tone.
I'm a captive bird thing smoking back down the road and going, back down the road and going,
And so effortless.
back down
Just-
the road and going.
This is just coming off the singing from his gut, but just also just telling it like it is.
Sure enough I'm gone.
What can I say? Muddy Waters. He was a hell of a figure, and I think when we think about, the type of the different archetypes and the different types of characters throughout history that build these structures that we all are aware of now, to be able to look at the prototype for what rock and roll was today, I think a big part of it comes from Muddy. I mean, being able to take the kind of, like I said, the kind of dangerous cavalier back road type of lifestyle of the Mississippi Delta, being able to witness that generation just before, the Sun Houses and the Robert Johnsons, and being able to take some of that danger and the racism of the time, and you have to be careful, the Klan is on the move, and taking that level of paranoia, fear, and almost excitement amongst some of the nightlife that was coming out of some of these avenues. And the fact that this is the prototype for this big city life, and it all came from that, New York, Chicago, LA, it all came from Southern culture, Southern Black American culture. And I think that enticed the audiences that were getting introduced to that in the big cities, especially the white audiences, but specifically, I think even the community, the African American community that wanted to partake in authentic music. Maybe they were one generation removed from Mississippi and whatnot. Muddy coming to Chicago and electrifying it kind of sets the tone of like, hey, this is what it's going to be. And if you look at the setup, his original blues band was basically what would make up a what you saw the rock and roll folks out over in Great Britain start doing in the 60s. Like, you got a keyboardist, you got a bass player, you got a couple guitar players, a drummer, and then of course, somebody that has a lot of presence with their voice. And in some instances, I think the virtuoso aspect of like people doing crazy solos, I think that was actually emulated from the harmonica players, like a Little Walter, or James Cotton, like where they were taking those wild solos, and that kind of emulated. That was emulated later on by like a Jimmy Page or Jimi Hendrix, where they were able to kind of recreate that same type of dynamic within the music. But Muddy was that guy. He was the guy that I think not only brought the musicality to it, but I think he brought a level of groundedness to the blues. Mind you, the guy partied and he did have his nightlife. He got into trouble. He was a tough son of a bitch. I think the biggest thing about him, though, is that he was still a dignified man. He carried himself almost like Vito Corleone in The Godfather. Had that type of charisma, and he was able to get things done, whether it was in the street or whether, even moving his career amongst all the kind of exploitation that was happening at the time between the record labels and blues artists and all that. And the one thing, I said I was going to leave you guys with a takeaway. My channel, it primarily focuses on historical figures that are, that have found a way to, carve out protection for their creative energy or whatever their gifts are. And it's a phrase that I like to call protect your garden, protect the thing that's important to you. Muddy's story is so inspiring to me because, I feel like even for my own life, I've had instances of this where living in different cities, working jobs, but still maintaining certain things in my life. I would always have a piano or a keyboard nearby. I would always have certain routines, and I kept in shape and the little things. And Muddy worked a factory job to be able to support himself, and he was working on the plantation before then. Like, this was a working man that supported his music. And I know there's a lot of people that get resentful of like, oh, music today is all about you can only have a day job and you got to support yourself. This has always been the case. The only difference is Muddy didn't make it until later in life, quote unquote. It wasn't until the Brits, exposed the world to what was in their, especially Americans, what was in America's backyard, which was, the Rollin Stones and the Beatles and, Zeppelin. Like, people, they basically would have these showcase shows, and you would have Howlin' Wolf and Muddy Waters and all these blues legends, Son House, come over there. And that's when they got their first taste of, international fame. But Muddy worked to protect that. He knew, he was like, there's a way to pay the bills, and there's a way to do this where you're able to actually transition full time into doing it. He didn't rush it. He knew that everything had its place and its time. And I think that's something that we can all learn and maintain in our own lives. There's a Japanese concept called ikigai, which basically compartmentalizes, the way that we look at output. You do something for yourself, do something that makes you money, do something that you love, and do something that will help the world. And Muddy and different characters like this were able to figure out what they solved for in each aspect of their life. So with that takeaway, start thinking about, what that balance in your life looks like and what it will take to maintain and continue to protect your creativity or your garden, whatever that might be that's important to you. So I appreciate you guys as always. If you found value in this video, do hit like and subscribe. But until next time, I'll see you then. Be well.